Oh my gosh, okay. Let me see if I can fix my camera really quick. Okay. There we go. That's better. Okay. Hi, guys. Welcome to the live show. Oh my gosh. I haven't streamed in a while, so let me fix my camera really quick. Oh my gosh. I'm so sorry. Hi. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the channel. If you're new, welcome back. If you're back again, my name is Jackie. For you guys who don't know, this is my channel, Evil Queen Books. I'm so happy that you're here for the live show. So today we're going to be talking about The Stand by Stephen King. If anybody, again, is brand new to the channel, hi, I'm so happy you're here. I hosted a read-along from the beginning of July to the middle slash beginning of October for The Stand. So it was about 3 months long. I am now getting around to hosting the live show, and this was supposed to be last week, and I apologize. I had to postpone it. Something with work came up. But anyways, again, if you're new to the channel and just joining in on the live stream, I hope you have a blast. I was gonna make this a half spoiler free live show, a half spoiler live show. Honestly, though, I'm just gonna keep it a spoiler free one. And that is for a multitude of different reasons I will get to here in a second. But let's talk about my feelings briefly on the book. So I'm going to be honest with you guys. This read along ended October 8th, I believe. And I just finished it like 2 days ago. Um, Only because I kind of hit a massive reading slump right in the middle of the read along. So it was just due to a million different factors, not necessarily the book's fault, but part of it was. So again, I just finished this literally a couple of days ago. That's why my bookmark is still where it is. Have finished it though, I promise. And I'm gonna be honest. If I had not been hosting a read along for this book, I might have DNF'd it. Um, Again, for a multitude of different reasons that we'll get into. But in the end, I did finish it. I gave it a 3 star. I actually started to enjoy it quite a bit more towards the end of the book than I did for the beginning. So that is just the beginning of my thoughts on the book. So like I said, a 3 star, which is kind of like in the middle of like where most of my rankings or readings for Stephen King have come from. He is an autobiography author for me. He is one of my favorite authors of all time. So that is that. I'm actually gonna put the book down because this is a very, very heavy book. But I'll hold it up as needed. So let's dive into more complete thoughts. So I read this a couple different ways. And let me know if you guys can hear me okay and everything, just in case I'm having any audio issues. Okay, back to the book. Sorry, I'm a little all over the place. It's been a long day. I read this a couple of different ways. I started out when the read along initially started back in July, reading it physically, but because the text is so dense, and because it's such a big book, I actually switched over to the audiobook eventually. But I did read like the first 100 pages of it initially physically first. And again, I found myself heavily struggling physically reading it. And once I switched over to audiobook, I flew through it. Again, until I hit that reading slump right in the middle of it, which again, I was just due to a multitude of different factors, not really the book's fault. Um, so I would say for me, the better way to go would be audiobook. I listen to it on Spotify, and I will link the information for the audiobook down below in the description box for you guys, so you guys know who the narrator is. I'll talk about it in my wrap up at the end of the month as well. Um, I think it was over 40 hours long. It took me about a month and a half to finish between when I started it right before the reading slump hit and when I finished it just the other day. Um, so it's a long one, and I ended up listening to it on 2.5, 2.75 speed, just so I could get through it a little easier. But I did really like reading it audiobook wise. I think a lot of my issues with the physically reading it was the fact that I found the first half, maybe 3/4 of the book very, very, info dumpy. And I like very much plot-driven stories personally, and this book was so heavily character driven, which there is nothing wrong with this. And I've read King's books before and they're more focused on the characters. I've never had an issue with it. This one was just a little bit different. Again, I think it was just because there was so much going on in the story itself. And then on top of that, we had a million different characters we're following at the same time. I'm trying not to get into spoilers, but if anybody does have specific questions on specific characters that I'm mentioning or going to mention in the live show, let me know. I'd be happy to answer them. And let me just check the chat. Okay, perfect. Sorry, I've been looking at the chat all night. Again, answering any questions you guys might have. But I think that's why once I switched over to the audiobook and once I kind of got a hang of who all the characters were and what their storylines were going to be throughout the story, I think I flew through it. Plot wise, for what the plot was, personally, again, I found the first half of the book just, I hate to say boring, but it was. Hi, welcome. Hope you're having a great day. Hope you had a great day wherever you may be at. Welcome to the show. I'm so happy you're here. Again, I'm here to answer any questions you guys might have. I'm going to keep it spoiler free. So if you guys have any specific questions with any specific plot points, let me know, and I'll make sure I mention that there will be spoilers at some point. But welcome aboard. I hope everybody, if you're just joining, I hope everybody's having a great day. Or was I talking about the plot? So again, once I switched over to audiobook, I found the story just much more easier to grasp. I will say one thing with the audiobook for me personally, it is only had one narrator. I wish it had more. I wish it had been a full cast narration. I think that would have made me much more invested in the characters themselves rather than being honestly, guys, there were some points in the story where I was just utterly confused. I couldn't keep my head. I almost needed like a full character chart of all the characters, who they were, and what their job in the world was going on because there was just so many. Once I think everything came together and we had all the characters interacting, I started to get the hang of it and I found it much more easier to keep track of, but for the first, like, 500-ish pages of the book, I was so confused. And again, uh, switching over to the audiobook definitely helped, but I still was utterly confused. And then once everybody came together in one spot and we did have, like, couple side characters, the main villains of the story, um had their own separate chapters, but once the heroes, I guess, of the story came together, again, I hope I'm making sense when I say this. I feel like I'm rambling. I'm so sorry. Um, once all the good guys, the heroes of the story, the protagonists came together, and I could, again, their storylines just all merge into one almost. Again, I found it much more easier to keep track of. Again, I'm hoping I'm making sense. Again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask away. Again, if anybody might be just joining in, I'm again trying to keep it spoiler free, but it is totally fine if you guys have specific plot point questions. Um, let's dive into the world. So if anybody again is new to the channel, I am primarily a science fiction and fantasy reader and writer. I write fantasy as well. But I have read several of Stephen King's horror novels and thriller novels and absolutely loved him. Again, he is one of my all-time favorite authors. So going back into the science fiction and fantasy aspect of it, dystopian, when we talk about science fiction, dystopian, the subgenre, is like my all-time favorite genre. So I knew The Stand was like a lot of people call it like a masterpiece of dystopian fiction. Okay. I would agree it's a great dystopian novel. Definitely for the more advanced, more knowledgeable dystopian readers out there, I think, because it's so dense and heavy in its plot, in its info dumping. Um, I would say if you've read quite a bit of dystopian novels, then you would probably really, really enjoy this. I would not suggest this for a beginner science fiction reader, beginner dystopian reader, primarily just because, again, it's so thick and dense. The world and what was going on with it and what led up to the dystopian aspects of it, I thought was really interesting. That might have been my favorite part of the story, but I wish we had gotten more details on how it all started. I think most people know I don't think this is a spoiler, it could be, I'm sorry if it is. But so spoiler just in case anybody hasn't read the book, it's a pandemic. It reminded me quite a bit of living through COVID, which was, 5, almost 6 years ago, which is hard to believe. It reminded me quite a bit of that, and, what was we were trying to get through living through a pandemic back a few years ago, and we didn't know what the turnout was gonna be. Obviously, this is more of a extreme level of a pandemic compared to what we lived through with COVID, but again, I found myself, once they were talking about the superbug, the super flu that this world was impacted by, referencing COVID quite a bit in my brain. I'm like, wow, this is again just like COVID, just a few years ago. Some even the symptoms that came described in the book sounded like, oh my god, it's like COVID again. So I found that really interesting and like just how people were, dealing with what this flu was causing to their society, going back to I'm gonna keep referencing COVID here because again, it reminded me so heavily of it. We didn't know what the cure was gonna be. We didn't know about a vaccine back when this whole thing sort of started. We didn't know how many people were gonna be impacted by it. We really didn't know. Would it be just, in a one localized area of the world? Would it be the whole world, which it turned out to be? We didn't know. So I found it just really interesting, just following the cast of characters as they're like, discovering new elements of the flu and what it does to the body, what it does to your mindset, living through a pandemic. I think it was really interesting and again, it reminded me heavily of COVID. And obviously this book was written in the 90s, I believe. Let me check the date on it, on what year this was released. Sorry, I wish I knew off the top of my head. Da, 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 da. Hold on one second, guys. Where is it? 1990, exactly. So we're talking 30 plus years ago. This was well ahead of COVID time. Um, but again, once you live through a pandemic, as sad as it is, you see the similarities between what a fiction writer wrote 30 plus years ago to a pandemic we experienced, 5-ish years ago, so almost 6 years. And yeah, I almost wish we got just more of a perspective of like the doctors that were dealing with the super flu. I wish we had gotten to learn a lot more about, again, how it started. And I know this book also just got a series of short stories that were written by different authors that actually inspired me to do this read along. So I'll definitely check that out, and maybe that will go more into detail of how it all started. But I wish King had included that element into the story as well in this book. But again, that could be included in those short stories that just, got released. I think the book is called The End of the World as We Know It. I could be wrong on that. Um, but that's just one thing that I wish had been included. Also, again, going to my back to my issue with the info dumping and how long this book is. I think personally it could have been split up into one main book and a sequel, at least one sequel. Because it is just again, it was so long. This means that my copy alone is 1,100 pages. I think that's most copies I've seen are like 1,100 pages long. So this is, I think this is the longest book I've ever read. It's one of the most challenging ones too because of the length. So I personally think, this is just my personal opinion, it could have been 2 or 3 books, maybe 4. Um, Especially because again, that first half of the book is just so info dumpy. I'm sorry, Stephen King, if he catches word of this live show, that'd be insane, but if he ever says it, no offense to him, it was just so dang info dumpy. That again, I think it would have been better as probably a trilogy, I would say. Or maybe take the first half of the or the first cut the first half of the book and just keep the second half from like the point where everybody meets to the very end when everything is resolved. That is just my personal opinion. It is no hate to the book whatsoever. Like I said, I did enjoy it for the most part. I think it would just been better as multiple books. Um, yeah. Then let's dive into the characters. Character-wise, I didn't really have a particular favorite character for the majority of the book. Again, I'm sorry if I'm rambling a lot, guys. If anybody has any questions, feel free to let me know. Um, but character-wise, I think I'm always a sucker for a really good villain. So I think the Dark Man and his whole crew of people ended up being the most interesting, but again, we also didn't get a ton from his perspective, we only got little bits and pieces. Um, so I am, again, just personally a sucker for a really good villain. So, I think that's why I enjoyed him. I also, in the end, really enjoyed, learning from Stu's perspective as well as Tom's perspective. Those last, like, 5-ish chapters were my favorites, the very end of the book. Just because I found the resolution of the story to be really, really interesting in how, again, they brought down the villain of the story and, how everybody tried to get back to reality, back to normality, after what happened throughout the book. I think between the Dark Man and his crew of people in one part of the country, and then Stu and Tommy at the end of the book, those overall were my favorite characters. I think they were the most developed characters, personally with Stu and Tommy. I think though we didn't get a ton of Tommy's perspective, but the bits and pieces we did get, I just found to be really interesting. I saw a lot of character growth as the story went on. And again, the end of the book just made me really happy with how everything resolved without getting into spoilers, like I said, if anybody is just joining in. Um, the resolution of how everything wrapped up was not really what I expected it to be. Um, Honestly, I feel like I'm saying a lot, but I'm trying not to get into spoilers just in case anybody did has not read the book and is just joining in the live show for fun. Um, yeah, I did not expect exactly what happened with the crew at the end of the story. I didn't expect that to be how the book was going to end. I was honestly listening to my audiobook, walking my dog, and I completely zoned out and got like just really in tune with the audiobook. Again, this is had only happened a couple of times prior to this because again, I had been struggling a little bit with the book before this, and I literally lost train of thought of everything around me besides my dog, obviously, and I was just so interested in what was going on in those last maybe 150 pages of the book. Um, I honestly I was walking my dog and all of a sudden I'm like again really in tune with the book. I'm like this is what I've been waiting for all 1100 pages prior to this. And I remember hearing a rustle of leaves behind me and it actually spooked me. That's how in tune with the story I was, how obsessed I became in those last like 150, 200 pages, I would say. Again, I was able to finally focus on what was going on and think and finally realize, oh, this is what you've been waiting for, Jackie. There you go. Oh my gosh, I was just so interested. And then again, the end few chapters, I would say the last three again, where we're following Stu and Tommy as they're coming back from what happened with the Dark Man. Again, just I was just like, oh my goodness, I am so invested. I can't even put into words without going into spoilers. But that was really great. So that's overall my like big major thoughts in the story. Like I said, I'm trying not to get into spoilers, but we'd be here much longer if we were going to get into spoilers. But again, if anybody has any questions about anything, I can again throw up a spoiler warning for you guys, and I can dive into more specific thoughts. But again, I overall really, I would say I mostly enjoyed the story. Again, the first 150 pages were not my favorite. I really struggled through it. I probably would have DNF'd it if it was not for the read along. I don't think necessarily if I had DNF'd it, again, if I wasn't hosting this read along, if I had DNF'd it, I think I would have come back to it eventually. I just don't think the timing was right for me personally. Um, but that's a whole different story. I did really enjoy the book in the end though. King, one of my favorite writers of all time. I will read anything he writes. I will say also, again, if anybody is hasn't read the book, and is thinking about reading it for the first time, definitely check trigger warnings. The language is very outdated. Again, this is written in the 90s, so keep that in mind. There is some language that should not be used in today's society, but it is in there because of the time it was written. And also, there is some content that will disturb you. It will disturb you. I was listening to it, I was physically reading it, and there was a few times where I found myself almost grimacing because, like, oh, there's some language, there's some scenes that, again, you really should check trigger warnings on before going in. Um, and usually that stuff doesn't necessarily bother me. I can usually move past it to an extent, but it was very heavily described, I should say. So that's why I'm throwing out a trigger warning for stuff that just check trigger warnings before going out. I don't want to get demonetized or anything. Um, but if you can kind of look past that, if you go in knowing that it's there and you shouldn't be surprised that it will come up eventually in the story. It's not really within the first like 500 pages. I would say it's more later on in the story that the trigger warning stuff comes into play. Um, but it again, it's there. It will kind of make you a little. I maybe it's a little bit sick to my stomach. Um, so again, just keep that in mind. Um, but that's really my thoughts, guys. If you guys don't have any more questions, if you again, don't want me to go into anything more specific without getting into spoilers. I'm gonna leave the stream up. You guys can ask away in the comments down below too. Um, but I guess I'll wrap it up here. Overall, I really did again enjoy this to an extent in the end. If anybody is struggling through it, if you're reading for the first time, I promise once you get through the first half, it does get a lot better in my opinion. I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. Not my particular favorite Stephen King book, but definitely not my least favorite as well. I will still read probably that short story collection, at some point, probably next month, and again, I'll continue reading, King in the foreseeable future. But that is gonna be it, I guess, for the live show, guys. I'm sorry this is a little bit on the shorter side. Probably in the next year, I'm already planning on doing another read along, so stay tuned for more longer discussion videos. But if you guys enjoyed the video, if you enjoyed the live stream, I should say, I hope give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're new. Would love to have you here. And with all that being said, I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will talk to you guys soon for another video. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye.